So just thank you for having me here today. I'm not an expert. It's really funny. Everyone seems to think that you're an expert, but actually I'm just a granddaughter. And my grandfather was like your grandparents. He was cuddly. He ate strawberry mousse. He didn't cook. He didn't do much gardening. He was always in his study. He played the piano. You know, he was my granddad. And I never knew about any of this until after he died. So he died when I was 21. And it was only because of my grandmother writing all the things down and translating his diaries and things that I got to learn about him. But he was a young boy that he actually was born in Prague. And he was born in 1915. So if it's 2022 now, he would be, what, over 100 years old. And he was one of four. He had two sisters and a brother, and he was the eldest. Picture, I think. There's a picture of him, his brother. So this is him, Bohuslav S here. His younger brother, Mila. And I think they're probably about 3 or 4 years old in that photograph. And obviously you can see they're wearing their costumes, all been hand sewn by the family. But his father, he was actually an official of what they call the Agricultural Council. So that's to do with farming. So he was an official. And his job was he had to manage several estates. And one of them was a stud, they call it, like a horse farm. Because at that stage, they needed horses, military horses for the military. So, you know, when you saw the guns, they have to actually be pulled by horses. In the First World War, you might have seen pictures of the horses pulling the guns. So he was brought up on a horse farm. He got to ride horses. So they would have been under the age of 10 there. Be able to go ride horses just like that. And actually, this ability to ride a horse coloured what he ended up doing in the future. So it wasn't very many people that were riding horses then, but actually it did actually have a big effect on what he ended up doing in the war. And also the other thing, he actually adored football. All his life he was bonkers about football, and he was a referee, and he was also one of the youngest secretaries of a football club in the village where he grew up as well. And he was also passionate about guides and scouts. And this is a picture of him scouting. So as a young scout, and this is he's here right at the back. So, and this is his school photo. So he is actually here. And the other thing you'll notice, that's their whole school. So they're all different ages there. Well, he had a real tragic happening though. He went off to school one day, and when he came home in the evening, his father had died of a heart attack. He wasn't even 13 years old. It was about 1 or 2 weeks off his 13th birthday. So it left him and his mum, and obviously his brother and 2 sisters who were all younger than him. And it was a really big shock because their house was linked to his job. When he died, it meant they lost their house. So they had to go and live with his uncle, who had a family business, and move away. And it was quite a shock for them all. There's a big upheaval for them. So 12, 13 to lose your father, big shock. And he concentrated on his school studies. He did really well. He went off to university, and at university he was really interested in chemistry. And this is his chemistry class. It was at the Prague Technical University, Faculty of Chemical Engineering for 1 term. And then what he did is he moved back. He wanted to stay on to do a second degree at Brno Agricultural University as well. So he was doing a second degree. First one was chemistry. Second one was agriculture. And if you think about it, a lot of farming is involved with chemicals, you know, like fertilizers and stuff that you put on the land, and also the kind of chemicals that you use in animal feed. So that was kind of where he thought his career was going. And he got really involved in lots of different associations and groups at the university. And one of them was he was the leader, the chairman of Zora. And Zora was like a cultural club. Here it is. So this is the actual sash that he's got in his photograph. He's here. Just there. And this is the actual sash that he wore. And his pin, the Zora pin, is they were like little badges that they wore on their lapels. There's the actual pin there as well. So you can see that they were cultural. So that meant they looked at the history and the culture, the dance, music. It was all about that side of the Republic, and they were really interested in that. And they had all these big events, and it was, you know, pretty prestigious. And he had offices as well, and he was He's almost like a journalist himself. I've got a pass here where he was actually what they call a press pass. So it allowed him to go to different events for free and get in as a press person, interview people and then report on it and bring things back. He was really involved in university life, lots of friends, and passionate about politics and being with the students. And interestingly, they also did a lot of exchanges where you go to another country and you swap with other students, maybe you do things like that. He was actually on an exchange in Bulgaria when war was declared. So he was actually on the 1st of September in 1939, when the Second World War started properly. He was in Bulgaria on an exchange and he wasn't sure how he was going to get back. And actually he was with a really good friend and they didn't want to go back. They actually went to the embassy and tried to sign up for the Czech army that was already abroad. And they were already suspicious of him. Why would you do that? And they wouldn't let them. They had to actually go, he had to go back home, and he had to go back home on a boat on a river. And he had to go all the way down to Vienna. And then once he got to Vienna, he had to take a train all the way back to the Czech Republic, back to his family. So it was quite a big, he was passionate about fighting for freedom at the beginning. And then what happened was in November, one of the biggest things happened was a huge demonstration in Prague. All the students came out of the universities and they were all demonstrating because they weren't happy because the Nazis had invaded. The Nazis were telling them what they could think. They weren't allowed to learn in their own language anymore. Really difficult situation. And so they went on the streets and protested. So you might have seen all the protests at the moment about Ukraine. So if you imagine the whole of Prague full of all students, Brno full of students, all the big cities all demonstrating about the Nazis. And during those demonstrations, one student was actually shot and killed, died. And they were really furious about this. So at his funeral, they all came out again. And again, the Nazis were trying to control them with people, big riots. They were shooting people again. And on the 17th of November, they decided to do something about it. And what they did is simultaneously, they surrounded all the universities in mainly in Prague. And they went in, they shut the doors and they didn't allow anybody out. And they were going through everybody's dormitories, their rooms. And if they found anything in those rooms that was anti-Hitler, anti-Germany, pro-President Benesch, pro-fighting against the Nazis, anything, they would take them out of their room and they'd put them into the main hall downstairs. And there were some people that tried to escape out of windows because they knew they were going to be caught, and they were shot. And what they would do is, if you could imagine the whole of this school, and every one of these rooms is a dormitory with beds in, with your mates in, and you're listening and you can hear the screaming and shouting and yelling and gunshots down that end of the school, and they know that they're coming through each of these rooms and it's going to be your turn next. A lot of them were trying to, during that time whilst they were waiting, if they had anything in their room, they were trying to shred it, burn it, flush it down the toilet, flush it down the sink, all of that to get rid of any incriminating evidence. But saying that, over 1,000 students, 1,500 students were rounded up, put onto buses and lorries, and they were shipped out and taken to a concentration camp. And the main leaders were actually shot. And these were the leaders of the universities. Now, obviously, my grandfather was one of the leaders of the technical university. He didn't get rounded up, but his offices were raided. So that Zora badge that we took round, he had offices where, and some of his colleagues were there, some of his friends were there, and they were arrested and they were taken to concentration camp. So this was pretty scary stuff. And he knew that they were after him, so he had to escape. And so like so many others, they escaped and had to go into Slovakia, through Hungary and Yugoslavia. And they were trying to get to the French embassy because France and Czechoslovakia were really close. And the French said, well, basically, we can't support you, but you can come and fight in France with us if you want. And if there's enough of you, you can make a Czech legion. And that's what they did. They managed to get to the south of France and they signed up. And when you sign up, you get a number and you get a tag. So like this dog tag. Some people see them like the American ones you wear them around your neck. This was a bracelet one. And this has got his number on the back. So does anyone know why there's dots through the middle? Yeah.
Is it to show that?
Yeah. So if you've got both pieces, yeah, you're alive. If you die, what they do is they snap it in half, and they leave one half with your body, and then the other half goes back with your captain, your military commander, and that's how they know. So if they have to bury you in the middle of the war in ground that's not like a proper cemetery or anything else, if ever they dig you back up again, they know exactly which person this was because your number's there and the number's on the back and his name's on the front. So I'll pass that round for you. You can have a look at that. And then also this is the actual card, his identity card for when he was in France. So it says that it tells you, it's got his number on again. And it's, one part is in French on one side and the other half is in Czech on the other side. So you actually get to see, and that's what he had to carry around with him. And he got put into the artillery. Now, yeah, does anyone know what artillery is? Yeah?
Artillery are like those like massive guns.
Yeah.
The ones with massive units.
Yeah, exactly. Do you remember how I said they moved those guns?
Yeah.
Horses.
Cavalry.
So yeah, so what he would have been asked to do that job over all the others because he already knew how to
Ride a horse.
And part of his job was obviously to care for the horses. It wasn't just about the guns. They had to look after the horses as well. But then they had to ride the horses and they had to practice with the hooking them up, taking the guns with them. And then when you think about how clever he was at university with all the maths you need for chemistry, they didn't have it was literally a gun and you'd have to like raise the gun and then you think, well, I want to hit something over there. I need to get it at this angle with this much gunpowder, with this amount of ammunition or a shell in it. How far will it go? And then you watch where it goes and where it lands. And then you have to go, oh, I need to go down a bit. I need to go up a bit. And the maths involved, it was all maths that they had to do in the head. So there was no calculators, nothing like that. This was all pen and paper maths. So when you see these pictures at the moment of the war in the Ukraine where they're using the artillery, that's all computed. You know, you literally go, I want to hit this, it does it itself. These men had to be clever enough to know what they were doing. And in fact, when they did some exercises here in the UK, so they had to practice, they did a competition against the British artillery. And the Czechoslovaks won by miles. They hit their targets over and over and over. It's a big competition over a weekend. And in fact, President Bennett went down to watch what was going on. He was really proud because these guys were able to do more shells more accurately than the British equivalent. So that was really made them feel proud about who they were and what they were achieving. So that was that. So he came over he was fighting in France. They were all down in South France. You've seen the bits going around. And Germany invaded France. And it was a really scary time because if they got caught, they weren't prisoners of war. Every single one of them that was caught would be shot because they were seen to be traitors. They left Czechoslovakia, which was taken by the Germans, and they'd escaped and they were fighting with the opposition. So the Nazis, the Germans, thought they were traitors, and that meant that they had to escape. Otherwise, it was certain death. So once the Nazis came through France and they were trying to fight, they were escaping, they were going backwards actually, down to the south of France, doing this, what they call rearguard action. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
So what you do is basically go, right, everybody, let's get back, but I'm going to stay here with my artillery group and I'm going to give you cover. So everyone in that artillery group stays there while everyone tries to escape behind them. And then they get to a point where they're nearly going to be taken and they have to lift everything up and then try and escape back again to another point, put it down, and do exactly the same thing. And it's called rearguard action. So they escape down to the south of France. They're on the beaches, the sea's behind them, they're stuck. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how they're going to escape because there's nowhere to go. So luckily, someone was able to get onto a radio and they asked the British for help. And the British sent a whole load of merchant ships down to the south of France and they escaped. My grandfather escaped on a coal ship. And I've actually got some photographs, I haven't got one here. There's a picture on a coal ship and all you can see is everything is like black and even their faces are black with this coal. And we have a photograph as well of there's a photo I think at home and literally it's a photo of the actual coal ship and you can see the coal in the hold and they've thrown things like bikes on top, and suitcases and all sorts of odd things that they want to escape with, but they were not allowed to take any weapons at all. They had to give their weapons up, I mean, really good stuff, all that artillery equipment to the French in order to be able to escape. So they left everything behind. They got on the coal ship. They went to Gibraltar. and they arrived in the UK. And the UK, they loved them. They welcomed them. They had a tented village set up for them up in Cheshire, and they lived in this tented village in the grounds of Cholmondeley Castle. And when we get together once a year in July, we go to Cholmondeley Castle, and there's a stone there, and we meet there, and we have to imagine all these camping tents, a whole village of camping tents. And they were waiting every day. New people were coming from different places and joining them until there was about 5,000 of them, and about 100 or more went off. So 1,000 went off to do the RAF and join the RAF because they'd been fighter pilots. But Grandpa was artillery, so they had to practice being artillery. They reformed. He was living, I think he was like artillery 1, battery 1 in France, and he was artillery 1, battery 3 in the UK. It changed, but they all were practicing things as well. So that's what happened to him. He ended up back here in the UK, and then it all went very boring because the Nazis were taking over Europe, but they were trying to invade Great Britain, and it wasn't working because our Czechoslovakian RAF pilots were able to lead the Battle of Britain and kept them out of the skies. So what they did was they moved them out of Cholmondeley from there because they couldn't stay in a tented village in the winter. It'd be freezing cold, and they found new places for them to live in Leamington Spa. Physical education every day. It was chucking it down with rain. They learned how to bomb train lines. They learned how to kill people silently. Just using their hands. They learned how to basically move around in this countryside as low as they could so they couldn't be found, digging holes, covering themselves in camouflage, all those kind of things. He was there for about 3 weeks. And I've actually got his diaries from luckily from the war. So I'll pass these around. So this one, I think, is one that's it's interesting actually. I've got one from 1938. Right. So that's this one. So that was when he was at university. So I'll pass that one round. So that's from 1938. The next diary I've got is 1941. And I've got 42, 43, 44, 45, 47, all of those, but I don't have 1939, and I don't have 1940. And I think I was trying to work out why I can have 1938 and I can't. 1939 was when he was escaping. It was when he's in France fighting. Do you think you can have much time to write a diary when you're in the middle of a battle? But also, what would have happened if he had his diary in his jacket and he got captured?
They would see it and they could come in.
Well, they could, but also, I don't know if any of you keep a diary. What else might be in the diary bar the day-to-day stuff?
If you have like all your secret stuff that you don't share with anyone else, and if you've got it and the Germans are safe, find it and discover it, they can read through it and they can see like secret operations maybe the British are doing.
Exactly, it's exactly that. And also the other thing you'll notice when you look at a diary in the old days, at the back, there's lots of little bits of writing. I can see a bit here that says Zora. If his diary was caught and it had all the names of the people that his friends in Zora, and he got his diary captured, what do you think the Germans could do then with those names? Go and find them. Yeah, kill them. Go and capture them. It wouldn't be just them, it'd be their families as well. That was this tragic thing. So I don't think we've got 1939 and 1940 because I don't think he would have dared to keep a diary during those years, because if he was captured, he could then be putting his friends and family at real risk. So that's 30, that one's 38, 1938. Then also have a look, there's some really interesting bits at the front. So we've got like phone numbers, we've got names of people, and then that one is 1943. I'll give you that one. So 1943 was when he did go and he went up to Arisaig and did the secret training. And then this one is 1945. And actually, this is really interesting. I think even some of you love these because they've actually got in here, it talks about Hiroshima. He just wrote the word Hiroshima. And it makes you realise that was when they dropped the first nuclear bomb. That news got to them in August 1945. So there's, even for me, I mean, it's all, and the other interesting thing with this is it's all written in Czech, it's written in old Czech. It's not written like every little word, it's like written in shorthand, like 1 or 2 words. And it's also written with a lot of short army words. So unless you know what the army words are in Czech language, you wouldn't know what they are. So a friend of mine, well, in fact, the secretary, the international secretary, Marta, and I, we've been trying to do some translation, because I don't speak Czech, but also to understand what he was doing. So in the 1943 diary, we've started at the beginning with January, and she's been trying to work out with me, because obviously I know his story, but she's got the Czech language, but then even then she hasn't necessarily got the short bit, and we argue, like we've gone on a Zoom call and we're trying to work it out. So being a good journalist is really hard. So if I give you that, there's some notes there about what was actually written in English from that little diary there. And if I give you that one there, it's 1945. So he comes here, he's doing all of that, and they go, well, actually he's going, all my friends got killed in those universities. I want to do something to remember them by. I want people to know about the stories about all these students that have been put into concentration camps. So he and his friends got together and they agreed they were going to get the day made special day right across the world. So it wasn't just the Czechoslovak students, the Czech and Slovak students, it was students in France, students in Poland, students in the UK, students in America. And so he and his friends wrote lots of letters, because there's no internet, no email, no mobile phones. And they wrote letters and letters and letters. And they actually, in 1941, a year after the atrocities in 1940, they had the day officially recognised. There was a big event at universities right across the UK, and they had to go to them. So there was a big event at Birmingham University. They used to do rallies at the Albert Hall in London. And they get all the students together that are free, and they talk to them about what happened and said, look, students have got a really important role to play in this war. You've all got to come together and fight for freedom, fight for democracy, fight for our country, let's help us get it back. So lots of things were going on. So he was involved in that whilst he was waiting to go back and fight. So he did his training in RSA, that's the commando training. He didn't get picked to go and do a secret operation, but this year, we have Operation Anthropoid. I don't know if any of you've ever heard of that. Yeah, you've heard of that. This year's 80 years. And it's what they did was 2 Czechoslovaks, or one Czech, one Slovak. They did the training, they parachuted to Prague, and they went and assassinated Heydrich, who was Hitler's basically best mate in Prague, and he was horrible. He was really, really awful to the Czech people. And they decided that they had to kill him. And they managed to do that, but unfortunately, a big group, they then had to escape, and they got caught up in a crypt in Prague, in a church, St. Cyril's and St. Methodius, I think it is, with some other parachutists that were just happened to be doing other operations. They all ended up in this church, and they were betrayed by one of their own team. And he told the Germans where they were for a huge amount of money. And then they went into they sort of surrounded the church, and eventually they had a big gunfight. But instead of surrendering, they actually shot themselves because they didn't want to be taken captive, because they knew if they were, it would be even worse. So that training, it was about 300 people that had that training, but not everyone did enough. A secret operation. Operation Anthropoid is really important this year, 80 years, and we'll talk about that awkward. So for me, having those diaries with his training in, and whilst he's training, he actually gets flu. He's really poorly, and he actually has a day off, and he has to stay in bed because he's absolutely full of flu. And one of the other things that I really love is, so much of his diary, I play cards, I play cards, I play cards, I play cards till 2 in the morning, I play cards till 4 in the morning. It was amazing. And also they needed a typewriter for the student union, and they told my grandfather, you've got to save some money, like the rest of us, will buy a typewriter. It's a typewriter with Czech letters. Try buying a typewriter with Czech letters in the UK, really difficult to get hold of, and he didn't save his money. And they said, well, we've got to go buy it. And so he didn't tell them, so he went and played cards for money literally the week he gambled, and he managed to get the money enough to find his bit towards this typewriter, but it could have ended up really badly otherwise. So that's that bit. So he started the student union off with all these rallies, and then it was time for Brits and the Czechoslovak army to go back to France and to start fighting back from France back to the Czech Republic. And they went over on boats after D-Day. So D-Day was June 6th, I think it was, 1944. They went in actually 1st of September 1944. They went in boats from Bridlington and they went over to France, and they had been given a really special job. There's a place called Dunkirk, which you might hear, and that was the place where they originally took all the British off the beaches at Dunkirk. This is later on, they've come back, and in Dunkirk was one of the toughest, meanest German divisions, and they were in Dunkirk. What they did was the Czechoslovak group with the Canadians and the British, they basically laid siege to them. They trapped them in Dunkirk, and they didn't allow them out. And what the idea was, they weren't going to fight their way in. They were just not going to allow them out, because if they allowed them out, this division would be able to chase the British that were trying to get to Berlin and Prague at that time. So they held them in there. So Grandpa's group, with them being artillery, was really important, because their job was to regularly bomb Dunkirk and keep the Germans from breaking out. And it was on one of those nights they decided they were going to do a big siege. And he was directed, he was part of a group with a couple of Czechoslovaks and some young French people who wanted to fight. And he was a group, and his job was to go up into the actual land, radio back and tell his team where to point the guns. So there he is, he's in this kind of no man's land, radio go, right, left hand down a bit, right hand down a bit, right, fire it there. And whilst they were doing that, his little group were overrun by Germans. And the French, several were killed, but Grandpa's friend was arrested, but Grandpa went and hid. And there's lots of like factory buildings at this time. So he went and hid in the loft of a factory building. It was all like fighting, nobody kind of knew where everybody was, lots of noise, lots of smoke. He was there all night. And in the dawn, he tried to come down to try and sneak back. He got caught. And he got caught because he was, I think he was a sort of second lieutenant at the time, they captured him and took him back to the German officers' camp outside. And they interrogated him, but they knew they were losing. Because he spoke excellent German, he said he was treated with a lot of respect, because they knew that in the not too distant future, the Czechs would be the winners and they would be surrendering to them. So to do something really bad at that stage was probably a bit futile. So he was then put into the jail in Dunkirk. That's where he was held. And they managed to do a deal with the Red Cross. The Red Cross said, right, okay, all you Czechoslovak prisoners, and we've got a whole lot of German prisoners here, we'll do a swap. So we met on a bridge and they did a prisoner swap. So Grandpa was swapped, and these Germans were given back, but he wasn't allowed to go back to his battalion, to his group. Part of being in war is if you do a prisoner swap, you're not allowed to go back and fight immediately. You've got to go to a different area. So he was sent off to Bruges in Belgium. And so actually VE Day for my grandfather was in Bruges. It wasn't in Dunkirk. But as soon as they had VE Day, he then joined his group, and then they all travelled back to Prague in tanks and lorries and to try and get back to their families. And he arrived back in about the 18th of May and to see his family. And I had a letter here, which was a letter from the whole family, saying the letter that's written to my grandmother, because she's back in England with my mum. And it's a letter that was written, and the whole family wrote in the letter. So it's all different handwriting. It's all in Czech, and basically saying there's all different people saying different things. It's saying to my grandmother, it says, "Dear Olushko, so after a very long time, the Schultz family has again met together. To celebrate the event, we've opened a bottle of champagne. don't know where they got that from. To us, to you, and Zlata's good health. That's my mum was Zlata. And our reunion in a short time. And then he goes on and he's saying that obviously they're having a bit to drink. And they said my uncle was saying silly things because he had too much champagne. And then so my great grandmother's written in the letter. So I can let you have a look at the English translation of that and this one. But if you imagine that that is written on the 15th, that's the 15th of July, 15th of July is when the family all managed to get together from different parts of the church. And we've still got the letter. You know, to think that that survived the war, it's incredible. So that's the letter you can see. And the first bit, even that bit's in English as well. And then that's the English translation there. So they go back, they're all really happy, they have a fantastic time, and really pleased to see each other. Nobody, luckily, the family had been killed during the war. We were lucky, we were a lucky family, we didn't lose family members. But afterwards, he was, they call it demobbed, in other words, he came out of the army, but he was able to go back to the UK, to see grandma, but also because he had to organise a student union, the first big conference of an international student union. It was in Prague, and he was put into London, and he had to welcome all the people flying from all over the world into London, and he met Fidel Castro, and he's the leader of Cuba, and he got off the plane, and grandpa had to greet him. And Fidel Castro came off the plane, he had this massive gun, that he wouldn't let anyone, and he had like a great big gun, and grandpa was just not blown away, but you know, amazed that he came off. And he wasn't Fidel Castro the leader, he was Fidel Castro the student leader at that stage. He hadn't taken over Cuba, so he got to meet people like that, which was just amazing. So they did that, and there's some badges. So the first conference, there's 3 conferences actually, 45, 46 and 47, and then they're all really into their badges. So these, if I give you these, take these out here. These are the pins that they had like badges for the conference, and they've got dates on them. So you can pass those round. And in fact, Grandpa nearly didn't get there because his job, as I said, was to be in London, and the fog came down. So the planes couldn't take off. So he really nearly didn't get to the conference. He managed to make it for the last day and hear all his friends talking and making speeches. So that was the student union all sorted, which he was really pleased about. And then he went back, he got grandma, and they all went back to Czech Republic, like lots of them did. They went back thinking, yeah, we're going to make a new life, new job. He got a job in a factory doing sort of like health and safety checks for the chemicals, and also for the forest area. And he was doing really well, and then suddenly everything changed. So the communists, the Russians who'd taken Prague and had liberated Prague during 1945, it all changed. They didn't like any of the Czechoslovaks that had fought with the British. They thought they were going to be too much trouble, and they wanted to take over the government. And these people were trying to stop them. My grandfather, all his friends, because they'd done for freedom and democracy. And so they all started disappearing. They'd wake up in the middle of the night, and they'd have like knocks on their doors, and they'd be arrested. And they'd be arrested because they were an RAF pilot during the war, or they'd be arrested because they had Western ideas, or they'd been heard saying the wrong thing. And it got very scary for a lot of people. And a lot of them were thrown out of the Air Force. They were thrown out of the army, and it started getting more dangerous. And eventually, what happened was, they realised they had to escape again. And my grandma, because she was actually born in England, she was able to go and visit her mother who lived in London, and she took the girls and she escaped that way. And can you imagine, literally, just like in Ukraine at the moment, you have to take whatever is in a suitcase. You can't tell anybody you're leaving. You've got one little tiny suitcase to take your whole world with you, and you're never coming back. Got to decide what to take with you. You're going to have to leave your house. Someone else is going to have that. Someone's going to walk in. You can only take a few clothes. You've got to look like you're going on holiday. So you can't necessarily take all these things. And people go, why are you taking that then? But you're going on holiday. So you leave. So Grandpa says goodbye. He's not even sure he's going to be able to join them. He may never see them again. So they go back to England. They go and stay with the family. And then there's people going to Grandpa, we can get you out. if you let us know when you want to go, we'll sneak you out of Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia. We'll do it. And he's coming to go, no, it's fine, thank you. I'm all right. No, I'm not going. No, they're coming back. I don't need to escape. All the time he's planning how he's going to escape, and he can't tell anybody. Can't tell his own mum. Can't tell his own brother. Can't tell his sisters. Because if they know something and they get interrogated, they'll give it away. And also it's his way of protecting them so that they didn't find out. And what he did was he went to work, and he used to have to deputise for his boss, and he would go in and do these inspections. And one was at I think it was a wood cutting plant, and it's in what they call the forbidden zone. So it was between Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, and Germany. And Germany had a bit of Germany that was run by the Americans, and a bit of Germany that was run by the Russians at that stage. And he managed to go and do this inspection and go out the wrong door, as he said. He didn't go back the way he came in, and he went into the woods. And because of his skills from the army, from scouts and whatever, he had to escape over mountains, he had to walk, and he had to go through these woods to get to the border. And then he had to cross across a frozen lake or something to get out. And he managed to get to the American part of Germany. And he had a friend who was in the embassy there, and they got him a special visa. So you're hearing at the moment about people having to get visas from the Ukraine to come and be here in the UK. It's still the same name. You had to get a visa. So it didn't take too long. And I think it was Christmas 1948. He was back in London with his family finally. Yeah, literally was Christmas Eve. So that was the best present, because they didn't know that whether he would necessarily be there at that time. And they had to start all over again. So they had he had nothing, and they had the suitcases, but they were given £300. There was a really nice guy, Dr. Cope. He'd been really friendly to a lot of the Czechoslovaks that arrived in the war, and he'd have them out for tea and things, and just a really nice British professor. And he gave him £300, which is a lot of money. And he loaned him £300 and said, here you are, this will help you and your family start your new life off. And Grandpa had paid it back in 3 years. He paid back £100 a year because he never wanted to owe anybody any money, and started his new life. And he actually ended up working for a company called ICI. So you've seen Dulux paint. So sort of ICI paint, Dulux, they were like, that was the old company. And up in Northwich, they had a chemical plant, going back to his degree on agriculture and everything, for phosphates, which you use again for farming. And he became the deputy works manager, which is basically like, if you imagine a massive industry factory, he became the deputy of that whole factory. And to do that and be foreign and do that in the UK was quite a thing at the time. Normally foreign people wouldn't necessarily get the high level jobs, and he did. And he managed to change his life around, but he didn't ever get back. He spent his whole life still doing. He wrote a journalist. He wrote articles, and he did radio broadcasts for the BBC back to Czechoslovakia, telling them about what the West was really doing. And he always told the truth. That's really important. Truth will prevail is a motto that the veterans always had. To tell the truth, make sure the world knows the truth of what's going on. So you look at what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. In Russia, we're talking about fake news and fake films and fake radio broadcasts. It's the same then. The communists were telling the lies then, and they wanted everyone to know the truth. So he didn't get back. He actually died just before the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. So he died September the 15th, and I think the wall came down November. So literally a month or two. And he missed all his whole life fighting for freedom for Czechoslovakia, and he just missed it. So it's a bittersweet story, really, in that respect. But it shows what he was able to achieve by always fighting for the truth. He was able to create a good life for himself and his wife. And there's a picture. So that's how I remember him. He's my granddad, eating ice cream and strawberry mousse. A great guy. But I think and then he also wrote a book. Finally, before he died, he wrote this book. This book is all in Czech, And it's actually the story of what happened in the student union. And it was published, and it's even now, it's one of the main books that other historians will use to go back about what the truth was, because he obviously told it as he remembered it, how it was formed, what it was for. So you can have a look at that as well. And then he had medals. I've got some of these medals here that you can look at. And this is a soldier service book. So it tells you actually his height, who he was, the jabs, he had his jabs done. And then I love this. This is the bit I like the most. I've got his watch from the war. So this is his actual watch that he wore during the war. And then the other thing which is really nice, which we still have, is, do you see this? This is really important. So when they got their uniforms, they were like British uniforms. Well, they looked like the same as anybody else. They wanted to stand out that they were Czechoslovaks, and they had these made, and then they would wear them on the top. I think in one of the photographs, I think the lieutenant one, you might be able to just see that he's actually got the word Czechoslovak on there. That's this one. No, the lieutenant one, I think it might be. Yeah, look there. Do you see here? So it's actually on his uniform there.
Did your mum ever get back to? She never back.
My grandmother did. Did my mum ever go back? We got back actually. Yeah, 67. This is the Prague Spring, before the Prague Spring.
Right, yeah.
66. That summer, when the World Cup was on, I think they were actually out in Czechoslovakia. So my mum went with my dad. My grandparents went, that's true, and that was the time he did get back. But other than that, when it locked down again, they could only meet in Yugoslavia, I think it was. So they would see the family, but they would, one half would travel from Czech Republic to Yugoslavia, and then obviously they would.
Are you in touch with any of the members of the family?
I am, yes, but what's interesting, the family they met in Yugoslavia, in 66, they escaped and went to Germany. So the family that I'm in contact with is mainly in Germany now.
Okay.
And in fact, it is the children of his sisters that I'm in contact with still.
How did you find them?
I was lucky. I tell you, the diaries and things, because my grandma, she was born in the United Kingdom. Although she was her mum and dad Czech, they'd come over before the war. So she was English Czech, and she was a brilliant secretary. So everything, she kept everything. And also Grandpa did write diaries and she translated them. So she kept the things. So Grandpa kept the things. So all these diaries from 44, 43, whatever, he wouldn't have taken them to France to fight the war. Grandma would, when he got married, she would have kept them for him. So what we're going to do is, I think there's going to be a project, isn't there, to do yes. So the final one thing they did do is that when the Nazis took over, all the newspapers were shut down. You're not allowed to use Czech in a newspaper. They couldn't report on any Czech stories, any Czech music, and they had editors whose job it was. You'd be journalists, you'd write something, you'd give it to an editor, and he'll go, "You need to check that. And if there's anything that's anti-German in it, you can't report it." And it's your job. You go, "Okay, I'll check." So you then check it. Go, "I don't think there's anything anti-German in it. I'll give it to the next editor." If he found something anti-German that you'd missed, you would lose your job and you would go to prison. You'd be the next editor, so you would be checking it. Going, "I found he's lost his job." You're checking it now, making sure there's nothing anti-German, nothing pro-Czech, nothing. You go, yeah, it's absolutely fine. Gives it to you. You find something in it that he's missed. You lose your job, you're in prison. And so people,
though he's a Nazi.
No, he wouldn't be. These would be Czechs who would be allowed to still be journalists, but you had to do it under what the Nazi rules. And this was happening. These people were not allowed. And in the end, most people just stopped writing. They didn't want to do it because they didn't want to lose them. And it wouldn't just be you, but your families as well. And a lot of people wanted to try and write something very pro-Czech, to be like anti-German. It'd be their way of fighting. So they wrote, when they were free from France, they decided they're going to have their own newspaper. It's called Our News. And every single day, the army team would create a copy of Our News. And it's all online. You could see it online. And they did photographs. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. This is the first one. I think it's one of the first ones. So this is one of the ones that it's done on board the Nautilus. So they're coming back over on a boat. You see them in a convoy with all the boats. coming back to the UK, and they decided to start a newspaper. And my grandfather wrote for this newspaper. Lots of them did, because they've not been allowed to whilst they were in the Czech Republic, and also they didn't write under their own names. Have you ever heard the French word nom de plume? Yeah. So a pen name. So you call yourself, I don't know, Charles, or I don't know, super writer. And you'd always sign your articles super writer. Why do you think they didn't write Bohuslav S?
Because somebody could identify them and kill them.
Absolutely. And if they couldn't get to him because he's in England, what could they do instead?
They would like send other home.
They could do, but you're quite right. They could also then go and get his family. So they would write under this nom de plume, and they did all sorts of different things. So they'd write the news of the day, the war news. They'd write articles about what's it going to be like to live in the UK. They'd give articles about even things like drinking tea. So in Czechoslovakia, they drink tea with maybe some brandy in it or some lemon. In the UK, everyone drinks tea with milk. They've never even seen it. They think it's disgusting, but also they don't want to offend the British people who are being so kind to them. So they get invited round to a house, they've got to have tea and milk. We've got to know that A, that's normal, even though it's not normal to them from their background, but also to do it politely. And then things like to go around for afternoon tea. If I said to you, come and have afternoon tea with me, it wasn't just a cup of tea. In Britain, an afternoon tea means you'd have jam and bread and maybe some cake if you're lucky. But they wouldn't know that. So they used to write articles in the paper about how to go to someone's house and have afternoon tea and not offend the British people. And then there's other ones where they would put up traditional, they'd write the music and the words of traditional Czechoslovak songs. Yeah. They used to do crosswords. And then they did things like, there was one where they talked about, someone drew all the different stripes and pips on the British uniform, so that when they met somebody and they looked at the uniform, they go, oh, it's got 3 stripes, he must be a general officer, general. They did, because they didn't know what the British uniforms were. So they did lots of things like that. So they would write all sorts, some would write poetry, some would write stories, like emotive stories to things back at home. So the idea is that you're going to create our newspaper, your style. You're going to be journalists. You're going to tell the stories using all the information we've got. You're going to make a paper. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. So,
But before we start, I just want to say thank you very much.
It's not information. It's not information, but it's my pleasure.
thank you very much. It's really, really amazing, and I think the kids they learn, not only the kids. As well. You learned a lot of new stuff, a lot of information. It's really, really amazing. So, but we're gonna be still teenager. So you're gonna do your version of this newspaper. You can do description, interview with Jerry. You can do poem, song, story, portrait, picture, crossword, puzzle, anything you can think of. So then we're gonna put it together and we're gonna have beautiful newspaper out of it, okay?